Happy New Year.
Woohoo! 2025.
What a time. Here we are.
I wrote 2024 on something the other day, actually, and I was like, and it has begun.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Well, welcome back to Couch Convos. How's it going? Happy 2025.
Happy 2025. It's been relatively uneventful, I suppose, which is good.
Love that.
Yeah. Feels like 2024, just new year.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I don't hate.
No.
Because the whole idea of New Year's resolutions is now coming on to the Instagram and the TikToks and all the things.
No. I definitely agree. Well, obviously, I'm a little bit under the weather right now. Start of the new year and end of the old 2024 with a nice little bout of pneumonia. But we're here, you know. So thanks in advance for the patience. I'm not going to say sorry because I haven't done anything wrong. But thank you in advance for your patience. And if you're listening, thanks for being understanding.
And quite frankly, I think you sound phenomenal. I enjoy a nice rasp in the voice.
It's better than it was before. What was it, last week when I started, or 2 weeks ago when I started really getting sick? I thought it would be funny to make a what are you wearing kind of joke to Caroline, and I tried to send her a voice memo and it just didn't land, and I ended up coughing and wheezing, but you know,
it was hilarious. I played it out loud for Kyle. He was like, what was that? It's like you couldn't tell what that was.
I will say though that I obviously have now been sick with some kind of respiratory something the last 2 New Years, and I ended up in urgent care this year. And just a big kudos to any healthcare provider that works in an urgent care setting over the holidays, because I was only there a few days after Christmas, and oh my gosh, they had hours of wait time, and they were just still so caring and compassionate. And so just anyone that was working at that time, thanks for doing you. It was pretty incredible.
Yeah. Also, 4 hours to wait in an urgent care.
Yeah.
That sounds like literal misery.
Yes. And I mean, I left and I came back the next morning at, I think 6:45, because I didn't want to sit around other people who could have been immune compromised. I could have gotten them sick. They could have gotten me sick. Just so I kind of triaged myself, and I was fine overnight. But it's quite the way to start the new year, I will say.
with trying to get rest, but actually not getting any rest because we don't feel well and because you don't know how to rest. So,
no, I don't.
Yeah, I'll call Sarah out with this. We have this note on our phone, and we put down things we're going to post on Instagram, what we're going to talk about, that kind of thing. It's essentially a marketing
it's a
notepad. Yeah. And I had some ideas on there for Instagram, and then I think it's 9 a.m. maybe. And she's like, I can do this. And I literally wrote back, please don't do this. I hate you so much.
This
Rest.
Is on the note. We're just
not even texting, not calling,
no.
Just on the notepad. And they're done. So Sarah does not know how to rest. And we love her. But also Ryan and I were chatting, and I was like, please sedate her so she will fall asleep and stop working.
And we did, and it happened. But I will say that is something I struggle with. So I think going into the new year, pacing is something I really want to work on myself. But it's hard though, when you own a business, you can't not.
Yeah.
But luckily, I don't know. I feel we've gotten into a good rhythm. There's still a lot of work, and it's never done, and there's always a to-do list. But I think I'm getting more comfortable always having a long to-do list at this point. Some days it stinks, but other days it's okay.
Yeah, it's drinking from a fire hose. I mean, right now we're trying to do everything all at once, which makes it feel like it's a lot, because it is a lot. It's a lot, yeah. But even with this, now we have it set up so we kind of know how to do it, and so it's getting quicker, and I guess that's going to happen. Hopefully, drop a comment if that does. We'd love some validation with that. But yeah, so 2025 New Year's resolutions.
I hate them.
Yeah, we had this conversation the other day, and they're not something that I do. I'm totally on board for people who do them. I've had tons of clients who are like, I want to have my New Year's resolutions for the year. But for me, I just know that I like to look at it a little bit differently. I don't know. I'm the type of person where I don't want to have to feel like I'm starting over. Yeah. I just kind of want to feel like, okay, I'm moving into something else.
Sure.
Because not all the time do I feel like I have so many things that I need to change or become better. And I'm like, no, I'm doing my best right now. Maybe I just want to like add some things.
Well, and it's also like such like a violent shift. Like, because I feel like it's almost normalized that between like Christmas and Hanukkah and New Year's, you kind of just do a lot of nothing. But then all of a sudden, it seems like for some reason, the 31st and January 1st, it's like you're expected to do this 180. That is like a violent shift. And that's just not what feels good. I mean, even if you think about like in nature, and this is when like the holistic side really comes out, this isn't a time for like blooming in nature. This is a time for like rest, recharge, and to like settle in. So why is it right now that like everyone's expecting you to do this like big 180 in your life? So I'd say if you're listening to this and you feel pressured to have a resolution, imagine like your therapist besties right here writing a prescription to throw your resolutions away. Like throw them out, get rid of them, give this as like your green light. Just don't. Like, it's fine. If you don't want a resolution, if you don't want to change anything, don't do it.
Yeah, you definitely don't have to. And also, like, if you do want to have some form of resolution, there's also a way to do that that doesn't feel so abrupt. Like, I know for me right now, I have, like, in my notes pad, I have things that I'm hoping for. Yeah. So it's more like I'm trying to manifest. Because, you know, for this year, we talked about it last time, I want to go into 2025 with, like, letting things happen. Yeah. And so, of course, there's hard work behind that. Of course, you got to always, you know, put the work in. But with that work, I want it to just, like, occur. Almost like, you know, it's already written for me. So it's like if I'm doing the things that I need to be doing, then it's gonna occur. So I have like a notes pad of like, oh, I want to blah 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 blah, and I want to blah 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 blah, but none of those things are honestly things that I'm trying to change about myself, but more like ways that I'm using what I currently have to get the things.
So how did you get to that point? Because I feel like that brings up like goal setting and like affirmations and manifestations. That's a great way to start the year. Like obviously these like resolutions I don't love, but there's like you said, like there's a good way to spin off that. How do you do that? So if someone wants to have like a healthier start to the year, how would you recommend that they do it?
Honestly, for me, I sat and I looked back on 2024 and I was like, what had I wished that I had done? And not so much like, oh, I should have done this, I can't believe I didn't meet this goal, but instead like, oh, you know, if I had quote unquote more time in 2024, which like time's a flat circle. I mean, there's literally, we make it up. But if I had more to 2024, like what would I have done?
I like that.
And so that's kind of how I made it like a bookend. Is like, okay, you know, let's just pretend like I just want to continue doing what I'm doing. What would that look like if I kept moving forward with my goals for myself?
It's like you're just enriching what you've already built.
And I like to look at personal, financial, and then like self goals. So, you know, personal goals that might look like something with my relationship or something with my family. Self goals that might look like, for me, I want to spend more time like communicating with the Lord and sitting like with my Bible, and like I have a bunch of like Bible verses on my mirror that I want to kind of like intentionally sit with, and most of those actually relate to our business. And then I have like financial goals, so that would look like the business. What do I hope for the business? What do I hope for you know, my clients, and what my caseload looks like? And I just kind of, but I'm very type A, so for me,
are you?
What? So for me, I have to set it up very specifically of like, okay, here are my themes or my topics.
You have like
and
domains.
how do I, like my domains of how I'm going to create my goals.
I like that.
But what about for you?
I kind of work backwards, honestly. Well, because I feel like there were so many years where like I did fall into that trap where I'd see people on social media being like, I remember like something really triggering about January. It was always like the start of 75 hard for a lot of people. And for me, like, that's just not realistic for my life. Like if I think about the time commitment, the financial commitment of like that diet, that is not realistic for my life. And so I had enough years where I set these goals and resolutions for myself, and I crashed and burned, that I work backwards now. And so what I mean by that is I start with, how do I want to feel this year? And so for me, how I want to feel this year is like content and like energized. And I always think about, okay, how do I get there? So for me, like feeling content, because I'm good at getting through like the trenches and I'm good at celebrating the wins, but I truly feel like it's in that in between where like you can have the most fun. And so for me, it's like, okay, to get into that middle ground of feeling content, I need to pace myself. And so I think that I take that idea of how do I want to feel and how do I get there? And it's like, okay, if I want to feel content in this new year, I can only get there if I pace myself. And pacing myself looks like listening to my body, setting breaks, and like watching my intensity and being okay with it changing.
Yeah.
And I think especially like when you co-own a business, there's almost this expectation that like you have to be so intense all the time. And like that's just not going to work for this like lifelong. And I think we're learning now like you really only see results if you're consistent. But like consistency takes a lot of energy, and like I'm not going to get there if I'm going 100% all the time.
Yeah.
And so I do the same thing with like, because I love like health and fitness, which is a really like hot topic around January. But luckily a few years ago, a goal I set for myself was finding movement that I loved and I felt good with. And so I have that. And so I want to feel like energized and strong. I know exactly what that looks like in my movement. And that looks like a certain kind of weights. It looks like how I can hold planks for a certain amount of time. So it's not like you said, it's enriching what I've already built, but it's really emphasizing how I want to feel. Yeah. Not what I want to look like, not what this like aesthetic is, but it's literally like how I want to feel and what I want this year to mean for me.
Yeah. And I think the big thing too with the Instagrammable like New Year's resolutions, things that we're trying to do, is there always has to be like an up or a super low down. So I love that you mentioned like contentment. And we were literally just talking about this before we started. Of like sometimes that can feel boring
and like almost wrong.
Yeah, like oh, I'm not supposed to feel this comfortable right now. And even other people will start questioning like some nothing's going on, like you're not having these high highs and these low lows, like are you even trying at life right now? It's like no, I'm prioritizing my peace and like I want to feel content and in control and like comfortable.
Well, and even I feel like the new year brings out so much of that like fear and like insecurity in people that may not have existed. And it's this idea of and I understand that people want to create content on social media that's inspiring and empowering, but sometimes it goes a little bit too far and it can make people feel damaged and like there's something wrong with them. Yeah. Whereas like when I'm sitting with clients this week, so much of what we're doing is celebrating the fact that they got through the holidays. And I'm looking at them saying like, you set these wonderful boundaries for yourself, like we talked about in our last, not session, but in our last episode. I'm like, you set these wonderful boundaries. You got through the holidays. Let's celebrate the fact that you're here. We don't have to think that it's brokenness or an attitude of like you need to change. If you want to enhance what you've built, that's wonderful. But like we don't have to go into this new year almost feeling like you have to get revenge on yourself. That just doesn't feel like a very like loving way to start a year.
Yeah.
It bothers me to my core.
Revenge on yourself.
Yeah, because I feel like it's because you think about like the quote unquote like revenge body, and I think of like Princess Diana's like a black revenge dress and things like that. And like if someone wants to do that for their own reasons, that's wonderful. But I feel like especially right now, like social media is so influential and impactful. We should just encourage people to start the year being kind to yourself and being intentional. And it's like, you know what? If someone wants to feel strong and energized and balanced in their year, that's wonderful. We can do it not because we hate where we're at right now, but it's because we love who we know we are and who we know who we can be. It's just, I don't know. I just think that this time is so triggering for so many people that, and I know we talk about it a lot, like you just have to be so intentional about what you put out there and also how you talk to yourself too.
Yeah. So right now, all the buzzwords are like gym and fitness. Then we've got like diet.
Like skinny is a big word. And like even saying that word makes me really just like my shoulders go up.
Yeah. Yeah. That and then self-care. Self-care, you guys. Okay. And to preface this conversation, we love self-care. Like we need self-care. I mean, it is the cornerstone of managing your feelings and regulating. However, with Instagram, especially right now, the graphics of what self-care looks like.
It's funny.
It's wild. It's like you gotta have 25 hours in the day.
You really do. It's like
endless amounts of money.
Yeah. Yes.
I actually had a client come in this week, like literally 2 days ago. And they said, I just have a question about self-care. They said, the geisha things, like
the gua sha.
Gua shas, yes. And I was like, yeah. And she's like, is that self-care? Because when I'm on Instagram, I'm seeing a lot of people using that. And then also a lot of people are doing a ton of reading. And I just don't feel like those things are really for me. So I don't know if I know how to self-care and like what that looks like. It was like, oh, bless your sweet soul.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're raised in the social media to think self-care is.
I'm sure millions of people feel that way too.
Oh, 100%. And sometimes like I feel that way.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, oh, I need to do a face mask and have like a girl's night for self-care.
I love the differences in our algorithms because yours is like skincare. Mine is like how to roast a chicken. Because like that was mine. It's like cultivating, what was it? Like a Nancy Meyers kind of aesthetic and like Ina Garten and homemaking, which I love all these things. But I was like, man, like I can't roast a chicken this week because I have pneumonia. Does that mean I'm not self-caring? And just like the thought of that is hilarious, but that's literally the messaging that we're given.
Yeah, for sure. And that it's supposed to be this huge like event to self-care. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, like, it does not have to be a huge event.
No.
Like most of the self-care that we do, because we should be self-caring.
Every day.
Should be, because you're not supposed to should. Don't should yourself. That comes from Mariah. I'll check with you if I can put this on there. But it's this idea that like it needs to be regularly because we each wake up with a certain amount of energy, right? Like we each have our cup of energy of what that looks like. Every time that we do something like go outside, talk to a human, even humans that we love, go to the grocery store, work out, like that's stealing from that energy. Yeah. And we have to be able to put something back. Well, you can't sit and face mask all day to bring back your energy so that you can go and have a conversation. So it has to be something like small.
Your skin will be very hydrated, but that doesn't mean anything about your feelings.
No, not at all.
Well, maybe a few. Like you could be, I don't know, restful if you're just sitting there. But like
maybe, yeah.
That's not really an emotion.
Yeah. So yes, the idea, that buzzword, I feel like that's going to be a trend right now, is the hashtag self-care trend.
Yes, which like honestly I love that because it's allowing us to have this conversation of what actual self-care is from like licensed therapists, but also like how we can make it, like how we can bridge the gap from social media to real life.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful too, because, you know, some people, the only tools that they have is social media.
Yeah.
They might not be able to access therapy, like you talked about. And so I think that there are ways to make those things like therapeutic. But I also think that like we just need to be mindful about what we're putting out there too, or encouraging. So, okay, if we could like, let's take a few things that are on social media and make it true self-care. Okay. So what about like a bath bomb? How would you make it like real self-care?
Okay, so for me, this would be like for mindfulness. And with that, like, and this is a hard one for me because I personally hate baths.
Oh, I forgot that you hate baths.
Like, I just feel like you're sitting in your own filth. But pre-shower before you bath, if you feel that way. I've learned that that's a thing. But for mindfulness and like grounding, that might look like using your five senses. Yeah. So that would be sitting in the bath. Maybe you turn the lights off, you have a candle, and you think, okay, what are 5 things that I can currently see right now? What are 4 things that I can smell? 3 things that I can hear?
Yeah.
You know, and you go through all of those techniques of like your senses to try and not only connect with your body, but also connect with your space. And that's the biggest thing. I have a lot of clients and they're like, well, I don't understand what the point of mindfulness is. And it's like, it's literally telling your central nervous system. I'm on a big central nervous system kick right now. Like the vagus
love nervous
nerve,
system regulation.
Polyvagal. I've been using that like.
I love polyvagal processing.
And so it's literally calming down your central nervous system, telling you that you are safe.
Yes.
And that's the biggest part of self-care, is to manage that safety, that feeling that like, I have enough energy, I am okay, I can continue my day and I can do what I need to do.
Well, if you think about it, and the more that you engage in like that physical grounding, the more you can also see that like your body is in fight or flight way more than it should be.
Yeah.
I know, like, especially for me, like my body was almost constantly in fight or flight before I started integrating self-care, which is like very scary. It's also just like not the way our bodies were designed either.
Yeah.
And then that we have things like high cortisol and just like so much inflammation, and then our immune system is wrecked, which is ironic right now. But I do think that like I love that because it also just gives yourself that time, and it's also just relaxing too on top of the grounding.
Okay, what about face masks?
I feel like you could use a face mask to do like progressive muscle relaxation because you can't move that much. Because I'm thinking about like whether it's like a gel mask or like a sheet or things like that, you really have to be still. And I feel like if you have that on, because I'll go into like different forms of self-care in a little bit, but I feel like you could like do a body scan and see where your body's at and like recognize while you're letting this mask on, like, where am I feeling tension right now? Where can I release that? And like, what state is my body in? And you can do that for your mind too, just to be like, what thoughts are going through my head at the moment while I'm having to sit here for 15 minutes while this soaks in.
Yeah.
So, okay, more like overused. What about like retail therapy? Because that is seen as self-care, of like a treat yourself day, retail therapy day. I've been guilty of it.
Treat yourself. I love retail therapy. So I'm toxic when it comes to that, because I'll be like, I just spent like a couple hundred. Like, it's not that bad. I just trying to like care for myself well. Oopsies. And then I'll be like, oh, my bad. Maybe that wasn't it. So for me, when I look at like why I go to online to try and purchase something, it's because I need that kick. Yeah. Like, I need a little dopamine hit. Yep. Yes. And so for me, that's telling me a need is not being met. And so being able to sit with that and say, okay, what need right now is not being met? And am I hungry? Am I thirsty? You know, do I actually need this coat? Or is it more just like, I need to spend some time in a more comfortable space? Yeah. Is it I need to be connecting with someone else? Like, so checking in with almost like a hierarchy of needs kinds of thing. Yeah. Of like, okay, where am I right now in my safety level? Am I feeling like I need this because I just want to enjoy it? Or do I feel like I need this because I truly need to be able to have this comfort that's needed for me right now? Yeah. And so, like, checking in with that, maybe it could be, like, go in and drink a glass of water instead. Yeah. Or, like, hey, I'm going to call my friend and I'm going to see when the next time we can go hang out. And maybe we just go, like, window shop and walk around so that we can have that interpersonal connection. Because for me, I'm shopping because I'm lonely. And that makes me feel better because I have, like, idle time. Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but, like, when I have idle time, that's when I start to do my most spending.
That actually, honestly, when you said that, I was thinking about my own self, and I was like, oh, like, what? I was actually thinking about like spending time with my mom, and like when we go and like walk around like at Avalon, it doesn't matter if we purchase anything, just like spending time with each other. That's all I ever want to do. Yeah. And so I do think that that's like my own like check in with myself of like, next time I want to purchase something or next time I hit add to cart, I'm gonna be like, am I just like lonely? Do I just need to call a friend or call my mom and just make plans? Because I think about like the joy I get from like making plans and then also following through with them is probably way better than like a joy from like add to cart and then like the sadness of seeing the money leave my account.
And even when it shows up, I'm like, did I really need this?
Yeah, there's the guilt.
Yeah.
I'm like, dang.
Okay, rot days. And explain what a rot day is.
So a rot day, I feel like it just became popular in the last like 6 months or so on social media. It's when you literally just like grow roots on a couch in bed and you don't do anything. And I do think that like there's an element of that is healthy. But I do think that rot days are not as helpful to us when we're honestly forgetting our basic needs. Yeah. And like we're not fueling ourselves adequately, we're not hydrated, we're not connecting with other people. And I do think that, like, you can have those moments of, like, quote-unquote rotting, but just, like, set limits to that. Yeah. So I think it's this idea of, like, hey, if you need a day where it is, like, sedentary, that's fine. Make sure all your basic needs are met and set an end time to that. I think that's just the big idea is, like, having that boundary. And I know for me, like, I cannot physically spend a whole day doing that. I think it's pretty obvious.
Very obvious.
But I can watch a movie. Yeah. I actually don't end up watching the movie. I end up multitasking, but I can sit for that 2.5 hour span. And I think that having that time block is really helpful. So that's how I would make it therapeutic. Yeah. And I do feel like obviously when we're making things more self-care, I think it's important to figure out like what it even is, because I know that we like launch into it pretty easily, but people again, like they don't know. And I like to break down self-care into 2 different categories. One of them being distraction. And I feel like most people have mastered the distraction side of self-care.
Cell phones. Hello. Yeah. I feel like that's the only reason they were created was for distraction.
And so there's the distraction side and then there's true coping. And the way that I like to talk about the difference is distraction is when you put your feelings in a box and you put them away. And coping is when you can spend time with your feelings and it feels safe. Yeah. And I do feel like everyone has a different proportion of distraction versus coping that they need in their life. but I do think that people just don't cope anymore. I feel like a lot of folks engage in the distraction side of self-care, then they're wondering why they don't feel better.
Yeah.
It's because there's no coping that happens in their life.
Well, it's like that idea of toxic positivity.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the difference between being toxically positive and then having gratitude as a coping skill?
Sure.
It's like, okay, toxic positivity is because you're not giving space for a different feeling other than happiness or joy.
Right.
Whereas using gratitude as like a coping skill, which essentially self-care is a coping skill.
It
is taking it and recognizing like, okay, I'm having a feeling of loneliness, for instance. I need to sit with this feeling. I need to process it, or make a time to process it, because we can't always process feelings when they come up.
Sure.
That comes up a lot. Everyone's like, well, what do you do if you need to distract? It's like, distraction is not necessarily a bad thing, but in moderation.
Yes,
it's like you have to give yourself a time limit and come back to whatever you're distracting yourself on, or else it just sits in there and just like rots away.
Right. So like the true recipe for self-care is finding your balance of distraction and coping. Because if you think about that, if we're only distracting ourselves, we're giving ourselves the messaging that our feelings don't deserve to have space, and that we're only caring for ourselves if it's like productive. And then if we just like push it away and push it to the side, and then I feel like people are like, oh, like I feel empty. I've done all of this self-care, quote unquote, but I feel like absolute garbage. It's like, yeah, it's because your feelings are pushed to the back of your life and they're festering. And then like they'll usually come back if these feelings are going unchecked. They'll come back in things like you might have an illness, like your health might be suffering. You could be more reactive. You can lash out on somebody. And that's when it starts to get a little bit funky. And I feel like people just don't see that there's multiple sides of self-care that do just need to be balanced a little bit more. So what do you feel like are good things to do for like the coping side of self-care? Because obviously we know distractions very well. But what about coping?
So coping, using self-care as a coping skill, I would say the biggest thing is being in tune with yourself and what you need currently, because that's where I always start, is like, okay, why am I trying to distract myself? What's the actual feeling that I'm having? So for me, if it is like loneliness, then I'm going to sit and I'm going to process like, okay, what's been going on around me currently? Like, is this from social media? Is this from the news? Is this from my family? Is this from my relationships, my friends, whatever that looks like? And then taking that and actually sitting with it and walking myself through it. Like saying, okay, here's all the feelings that I'm having currently. Got those out there. Good. Perfect. I usually give myself about like 30 minutes to process. Because
it's a long time. That's a long time in your feelings.
Yeah. And I think the reason that I do that is because I over rationalize. So I need that extra time, because I need to be like, okay, am I making excuses for myself or for someone else, or what's really going on? And then with that, like setting boundaries. Like saying, okay, if it's with, I don't know, my friend keeps talking about this certain topic and it's just really bringing me down. It's like every day I'm hearing it every day. Then I sit with that boundary of, okay, I have to set a boundary for myself. And boundaries are self-care. I know that that's like such a classic, like Instagram, you're doing it for yourself. And we talked about it last time. So it's like on my brain right now. But of setting that boundary and saying like, hey, I love you so much. But right now, why don't we do something else? Let's spend some intentional time together. And so that would be an example for me of like how to make self-care less about like the Instagram and more about like, how is this actually helping me to process my feelings, move forward, and to feel like I'm like growing in what's going on. What about you?
So I feel like, first of all, like therapy for me is very much coping. Because I just like, I make myself busy a lot. I think we've definitely pinpointed that like slowness and stillness is something I really could improve on. But so I think for me, like having a sit down therapy session with my own therapist is wonderful coping for me, because it gives me the time to really think about like, where's my head even at? So I think spending time outside is really helpful for me, and having that true like literal grounding into the earth just to see where I'm at. And overall, like slowing down. And so I'm someone that I used to journal a lot, and that was a great way for me to cope, because the more I would write, the more I would realize was in my head. I kind of just do that internally now. I would like to get back into journaling. It was just something that I did daily for so long. But I think that obviously therapy, being outside, and writing is really helpful. And I also think that like turning things off is big for me.
Yeah.
And like sitting in silence is really good coping for me, because obviously like if I'm in the car a lot, I'm listening to podcasts, audiobooks, I'm listening to music. In those moments, I'm not thinking about what's going on in my head. I'm thinking about whatever I'm hearing. I also think that's a hard part about being a therapist, is I'm always locked into something else.
Yeah.
So I think like taking time to just tune out is really good for me in terms of coping. And I think a big one is self-talk. And I think that that's a lot of something that people could really use some love with in the new year, especially when we're talking about self-care, is when we're caring for ourselves in this way, sometimes we can feel less than, or we'll have these feelings come up and it doesn't sit well with us. And it's this idea of like, wow, like I want better for myself. And I think that's when we really need to watch how we talk to ourselves. And I know that like I have some clients who they see a picture of their younger self and they pretend to talk to them because they'll be more kind to the child version of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, my clients are amazing. And I love that. But like for me, like I think about like my nephews. And if I think about, again, it's a child, I think about my nephews, I think about my husband, like if they were feeling these same feelings, I would give them so much more care. And I try to talk to myself in a similar way. Because even like, I think about like when my nephew like gets hurt or he's cold and I talk to him about that feeling, it's so considerate and we give them so much grace and patience. Our self-talk should emulate that too. I know it's the shoulds, but it's this idea of we need to be kinder to ourselves as people. And I think that's like a big step in really caring and coping with what we're dealing with.
Yeah, for sure. Especially because, God, we deal with so much. We are so hard on ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
And we expect like everything all the time. And when you look at it, it's exactly right. Like when I'm talking to my friends or my family or even like kids that I see, I would never sit and say like, wow, I cannot believe you're having that feeling. Like you're being so dramatic. Could you imagine? We would have no one in here.
If that ever came out of your mouth, I would be like, are you okay?
I would hope so.
I would
hope that you'd be like, what is your problem?
I would genuinely feel like you were in like a medical crisis.
Yeah. But like in my brain, that's how I talk to myself. Like, wow, you're being so dramatic. You need to get over this and keep moving forward.
I actually had that same thought after a session because my voice started to go at the end of the session. And I apologized to the client. I said, oh, I appreciate you being considerate, knowing that I don't sound like myself. And in the back of my mind, I was like, man, like, I don't want you to waste your client's time. It's not fair to them. But my client was like, I appreciate you so much for being here. Thank you. And they even said, I know that you obviously don't sound or feel like yourself. I can't tell in your clinical delivery. And I was like, wow, like you were very kind to me and you didn't have to be. And they're like, that's just what you do. It's like, oh, my self-talk needs some work then.
Yeah. And I feel like that stems from this idea that we always have to be productive.
Yeah.
Of like, we're always supposed to be better.
And like changing, you need more.
Yes.
It's always like we're moving this threshold and we're moving this finish line and you're never enough. I do think that like a lot of New Year's resolutions make people feel like they will never be enough.
Yeah. Which would be such an interesting research proposal, is to look at like self-talk during the new year, like that first day, what that would look like, because I feel like they're bred through that. Like even one of mine, I guess I actually could consider this a resolution, so Caroline, I gotta check in on this one. But like I have written down in my notes to show more kindness. And I'm like, why do I feel like I'm not showing kindness to others when literally my job is to sit with others as they're feeling continuously? And it's that idea of like, you're not being kind enough. You have to make people feel better. You have to do this. You got to be a better therapist. You need to make sure that all your relationships are thriving and processing and all the things. And I'm like,
that's exhausting.
Whoa. So like that just made me realize I probably need to check in with one of mine, because it is this idea that we are not doing enough.
Right. Okay, so after a brief intermission, we talked about a lot how New Year's resolutions give people this idea that like they're never enough. And I also think that like I feel like this is a good time to think about what is it called, like breaking like the fourth wall in film.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of people who listen to podcasts like ours are wanting to develop themselves, and I think it's wonderful. But a lot of those folks are ones that do suffer in silence. And so I do think it's helpful to say, like, if you are even thinking about self-development, affirmations, manifestations, if you're listening to this, just know that, like, you are more than enough just by being here. And I feel like that is overused. But if you think about in the last several years, or like even in the last several months, like if you are still wanting to develop yourself and wanting to be a better version of yourself, oh my gosh, your resilience and spirit has got to be second to none. And so I feel like while we're really going into ways to improve self-care and coping and things like that, I feel like it's helpful to affirm the fact that, like, if you're still sitting here, we got to celebrate that. Like, I'm sorry. And that is not like a participation trophy at all. That is truly like the fact that people are still out there doing this is amazing. I mean, we see it every day, but like the strength of the human spirit is incredible. And we do have to celebrate that. And I think that we can do that through the way that we talk to ourselves.
Yeah, it's a plus and, right?
Right.
Like, you are already amazing and phenomenal.
Right.
And if there's areas of your life that you do want to, like, improve on or see some development, that's totally great and totally fine. But it is not 100% needed.
Sure.
But, like, we're always trying to be our better selves. But recognizing you're trying to be your better self.
Yes.
Not someone else's better self.
Right. Because when we think about this idea of, like, I'm never enough, I actually ask clients about this a lot. Like, who determines what enough is? Who sets that? Whose voice is in your head? Yeah. Is it, like, a societal thing? Is it a cultural norm? Is it a parent that you hear in your head? Is it a partner? Whatever. First of all, like, who has the power to tell you what is enough or not? Yeah. And if it's somebody else, what do you want to do about that? And if it's you, like, what does that mean? Because if we're always moving the threshold towards what is acceptable for ourselves, we can't acknowledge how far we've come. And I think it's important to, like, just slow down and acknowledge, like, how you've gotten to this point to begin with, and just to see, like, where you want to go and make sure that it's authentic for you.
Yeah. Sitting and being perfectly imperfect and loving that.
Yes. It's so hard.
It is hard.
It's important.
Yeah. Okay, so self-care, we've spent a lot of time talking about what it is, what it isn't, what it can be, how it can be intentional, how it can be not intentional. So, like, to wrap up, I guess, why is it important? Like, what's the purpose? Why do we need to do it? Why are we even having this conversation?
I think I actually do this with some of my kid clients once in a while. We make a volcano and we call it, like, Mount St. whatever the name is. So I'd say, like, it's Mount St. Sarah, Mount St. Caroline. And we talk about, like, if we get closer to erupting, what that looks like. I feel like self-care keeps our volcano from erupting. And it doesn't have to be, like, anger. It can be literally any feeling. It just keeps us a little bit more, like, at peace with where we're at. And it just keeps us in the driver's seat of our own life as a whole. And I do feel like the absence of self-care, a lot of people don't do it because sometimes they don't have the privilege to. Yeah. And it is a privilege to be able to care for ourselves. Yeah. But I do think that, like, the absence of self-care, it does lead to, honestly, there's a lot of research. It can lead to negative health outcomes, and it can lead to a lot of different, like, chronic illness, long-term illness, but it also just leads to that, like, long-term dissatisfaction with ourselves and our life too. Yeah.
So I look at it as not the opposite, but like a converse. So like yours is building up, whereas mine is diminishing. Oh, so when I talk with, like, clients about it, it's the cup. Yeah. Of, like, okay, I'll say, what's your favorite beverage? And they'll be like, oh, it's Sprite or it's chocolate milk or whatever it is. And we draw a cup and I say, okay, when you have a full cup of chocolate milk, what does that look like? Oh, that's great. Like, I have a full glass of whatever with my meal. Like, I'm totally in. Well, we all wake up with different amounts in our cup. Like, some days I wake up, I'm full. Next day I wake up, I have nothing in my cup. And then we go through and I say, okay, what's something that you have to do today? Well, I have to go to school. Okay, perfect. And then I dump some out of their cup. Yeah. Okay. What's something else that you have to do? Well, I have to go to sports. Okay. Dump that out of your cup. Well, I have to talk to my mom about this grade that I got. Dump that out of your cup. And then we keep going all the way down until we have nothing in our cup. And I'm like, okay, then what happens? Like, well, I don't know. And I said, what do you have to drink? And they're like, nothing. And I'm like, that's called burnout. Yeah. Like, shutting down, not being able to be present in whatever you're doing. Your
volcano has erupted. Your cup is empty.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you are not able to continue in the best way that you can present yourself in that circumstance. And so I'll be like, well, how do we feel it? And they're like, well, I would just go and pour myself more. I was like, okay, great. So what does that look like for you? How do you pour yourself more energy? And people are like, well, I need to like push through. It's like, no, you don't have anything else to give.
Right.
So you're giving to yourself.
How do you push through when there's no gas in the tank?
Right, exactly. Trying to drive a car with no gas in it, essentially. We got that one in grad school. Loves that one.
All the time.
But so it's interesting of like that erupting or that having nothing left. It's just the concept that you're not able to show up if you don't have the ability to give what you can give. Like if I am not in a emotional or energy state to be able to show up to a conversation, I'm like dissociating.
Oh yeah.
Like I'll sit there and I'll be like, I don't even know what we're talking about right now.
Well, and I also think about like the times where I'm the most depleted are usually after the holidays. So it's interesting that like there's so much pressure to do more and pour out when that's usually the time where people are at their most depleted. Yeah. So I think that it just shows that like this is the time to care for yourself and like figure out what caring for yourself looks like. Because if you imagine like if you can do that now while you're depleted, imagine how much more vibrant your joy will feel if you're doing that in times where like you do have more gas in the tank. Feels pretty good.
Does feel good. Yeah. And recognizing that things that take your energy are not necessarily bad. No. Like there's no good or bad, there just is. Right? And like recognizing that no matter what place you are in your life, things could be going amazing in your opinion. Like you could be doing all the things, checking off all the lists. That's still depleting because you're still having to put work into that. Just like with this business, like it's flipping exhausting and it's been all great things. But at the end of the day, it's like, I'm exhausted. It's like, well, why? We got such and such views on this and we created a TikTok, we made a podcast, we put up whatever on our store. Like, but those are all things that are taking from our energy. And so we have to be able to put that back in. So the next day we can wake up, do the whole thing over again.
Having that gas in the tank means that it makes it easier to get through the days where you don't feel great, but it also makes your good days even better. Yeah. And you can just have more energy to give. So I do think that it is really important, and it's something that like consistency is key, and that's so hard. And it's one of those things where I talk to clients and it's like, imagine if you were consistent with yourself for 30 days. Because I feel like a lot of clients come in and they're like, every session they're like, what's something different? I want something else. I want something new. And it's like, hey, like we don't need to layer on coping skills every week, every 2 weeks, every month. Let's just be consistent with ourselves, and also like remind yourself that you're worth being consistent. Yeah. And like, it's okay. We can pour into you and see what comes up and see how you feel.
Self-care is not a quick fix. There is no magic wand for emotions, health, anything. There's no magic wand for that. And like being able to sit with yourself and validate yourself enough to say like, I need this every single day, even if it looks different every day. And maybe it's something as simple as I spend 5 extra minutes in the shower. Perfect. Awesome. Like you have put yourself first and you have prioritized your peace.
Yes.
So
I love that. I think that this is, I know I say it like every time, but these are such important conversations to have. And I think it's a great start to the new year of like, you're enough. If you want to improve and evolve, like that's wonderful. But if you don't, go off, like do you, it's okay. But I will say that if anybody listening to this wants a place to start and they're like, I don't even know what I want to do with this, we do have a free resource on our website. If you go to www.soulhavengeorgia.com, you can download a free sensory like calming guide. It's called New Year, New Calm. It's like a 5-minute or less read. I think it's like 3 pages that I did. And it really just teaches you how to ground in your own body with your senses. So it's a great place to start. Like we talked about, like getting in control in the driver's seat of your own life and seeing how that feels.
Yeah. And of course, check in with us on socials. Thanks for hanging out today on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever the heck you are.
Everywhere.
But check out like our Instagram. We put up some nice graphics and some funny things sometimes. And like we are looking at self-care and looking at those things, but we're trying to take a more, I don't know, more validating, a more realistic approach to what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. By the time this goes up, there's a post that we have coming up that's like realistic affirmations for the new year. So definitely give it a look. But as always, Couch Convos is not a substitute for therapy. And if you feel like you are in crisis and you need something immediately, please call 911, visit your closest emergency room. But as always, like if you want to work with us, drop us a line, visit our website, use our socials. We are very available. If it's not us, we're happy to connect you with someone who can help.
Happy 2025, guys.
Woo!